Hi, I'm Felicity LaRouge from Phenomenal People, and this is Conversation with Leaders. Our guest today is Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, who is the CEO of 21st, one of the world's leading gender consulting firms, and author of 7 Steps to Leading a Gender-Balanced Business, as well as 6 other books. She works with top management at some of the world's best-known companies to identify business opportunities of gender balance and how to achieve it. Avivah, welcome.
My pleasure. Very nice to be here, Felicity.
Thank you. So, as I say, this is just a conversation. So I'm going to ask you, just share a little of your journey with us and how you came to be where you are as one of the world's leading gender balance consulting firm leaders. How did that come about?
Well, sort of by accident, like most people end up in strange places in their careers. I started out as a computer programmer a few decades back, so not something that most people know. And a very male-dominated environment. There were 2 women in my class of 250 math students. I should have known this would be more relevant than I thought it was at the time.
Nice.
And I really was not involved with gender issues until I was pregnant with my 2nd kid, living in Paris and trying to figure out how to balance work and children and all these crazy questions that I was looking for some answers, and just got a few women together.
Yes.
And it became one of Europe's largest professional women's networks a few years on. And I ran that for 10 years. And learned a lot about women and career issues. And after 10 years of listening to women, I decided it might be time to also find out about the other side.
Yes.
And when I struck out from the NGO world of professional women's networks towards the consulting world, it was really to engage leaders in how to balance large businesses. And I spent the next 15 years mostly with men, or rather male-dominated executive teams, on how to figure out how to balance large organizations sustainably and not too divisively.
Yes. And that's what I really love about your work. It's a very collaborative approach, isn't it?
Yes.
That you're working with both genders, and to get that balance, rather than, I remember you say in the book, sometimes with women's groups, when gender groups and women are in a room on their own in a little huddle, it can actually be almost counterproductive, because some of the conversations can be about the hardships and the challenges, and it kind of winds everybody up a little bit. These are my words, not yours, by the way. Rather than actually having the conversation with the people that they need to have the conversation with, it becomes more of a kind of an offloading session, and that's what you've really pioneered, isn't it? The conversation with both sides of the gender question, of the gender conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's also the frame that we don't necessarily, when we get involved in all these very well-meaning women's networks and ERGs and all this kind of thing, we don't understand the systemic consequences of what that looks like to the rest of the organization. And why would it make sense to isolate some out of power group amongst themselves to talk about why they're not making it throughout the organization? Sounds to me like a better conversation to be had with the people who actually run the organization, define the culture and create the systems that keep these imbalances in place. And so I think if you don't have the right people in the room, you're never going to get the right solutions. And I think women are not always apprised of that pretty basic fundamental reality about power and influence until later or more senior in the organization.
Sure. And it can be very, in all kinds of challenging conversations, can't it? We get kind of involved in our own perspective, and then it's quite hard to shift it, because it becomes a reality to us, even if it's only 25% of what the real big picture is. So it's so valuable, isn't it? If we have those conversations together, then there's no Chinese whispers either.
Well, and it also doesn't let you sit there going, some other people are against me or
Yes.
my sort.
Yeah.
I think, listen, we've learned enough since 2016 about the dangers of dividing people amongst themselves and on emotive, complex human evolution issues like gender balance.
Yeah.
It seems to me increasingly important that we bring everybody together to understand how shifting gender roles affect talent, customers, businesses, and societies.
Mm.
And that's something we had better solve together, because
Yeah.
surely the way we've done it so far is not
Hasn't.
guaranteeing us the calmest outcome.
Exactly. Exactly. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced as a leader?
As a leader in my own organization, or in doing this sort of work inside other organizations?
In your own organization?
I think the biggest challenges are emerging into a little early, and getting people to kind of catch up
Sure.
with some of these ideas. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a little lonely, right, out there in the windy
Sure,
howl
sure, sure.
night. Um, and I think getting used to, I often tell people who are in businesses that sell things that people actually want, how lucky they are, because I seem to have spent the last half of my career trying to sell things that people don't really want. And I think that's always a bit of a challenge, right? So you end up constantly sort of swimming upstream.
Sure. I mean, because you've effectively been a pioneer in this work, haven't you? And I love that you say that, because I think sometimes, particularly now when a lot of people coming out of the pandemic, or at this stage of the pandemic, are rethinking and thinking, maybe I'd like to work for myself, start my own business. And it can be challenging, can't it? If you have a pioneering idea, an innovation that you want to bring into the world, if nobody else is doing it. And you really have to build resilience, don't you, and character, and really know what you're about to continue with that.
Well, I think it takes, there are people who are much more motivated by extrinsic affirmations and feedback, and others who are more motivated by intrinsic. And I think it's extremely difficult to run your own business if you depend on external recognition, which may be never coming, or quite controversial. And so I seem to be luckily a little bit more parked on the intrinsic, and I'm just interested in these questions. So if you're interested in a topic and passionate, I do think COVID has opened up a lot of reflection time for people to think about what do they really care about, and how do they actually want to spend the rest of their lives, which may be shortened by a nasty disease. Nothing like waving mortality in your face to
to make you ask the big questions.
What you're getting up in the morning. And I think that's salutary. I've also been a coach for the last 20 years. And so exploring with people what they're doing and why they're doing it, it's always a useful conversation, right?
Very nice. And I love the distinction you made there, the balance of interest and passion as well, because it's got to be something that you love, that really, as you say, if nobody else had shown any interest, you still had enough engagement in the subject yourself to want to continue to study it and work with it. Wonderful. So what are the biggest...
If I had needed anybody else's interest, I wouldn't have, it would not have lasted very long.
Oh, that's real strength of character there, which is important, isn't it? Particularly, I think, in anything that you're passionate about.
Stubbornness is all.
Very nice, very nice.
I had two older brothers, so it's.
There you go. So you had training from a very early age. No, that's wonderful. So, what are some of the biggest challenges you've had then with working in gender balance and with the clients that you've had? I mean, obviously not to name names, but what are some of the brick walls that you may have had to kind of take down brick by brick?
I think one of the great challenges is getting over the framing of this topic as some little women's issue, and we got to help empower these poor ladies who lack confidence. If I hear that one more time, I'm going to shoot myself. Right? I am so tired of hearing how women lack confidence, and nobody, as my colleague Thomas Shamora Premusic keeps reminding us, men have too much of it. So who says that we lack it, right? So these kinds of things are the stereotypes, the assumptions, the received wisdoms. It's not actually the disinterest, well, and also where it's positioned in the organization. So I have struggled long with the issue that it's bundled as a minority group among many in the diversity department. And I keep suggesting that this isn't really a diversity issue any more than the Chinese are. And how you bundle your China strategy is a little bit how you might want to be bundling your women's strategy. And that's not usually the way it's done. And it's incredibly handicapping to any kind of success in gender balancing if it's framed as a nice little something among all the diversity. So now what we're getting a lot of is, oh yes, but we've moved on from just gender.
Yes.
As though that's kind of that we did that long ago. And that's a sort of no longer a fashionable issue, or we're getting too much backlash now because people say that it should be more than just gender.
Indeed. I
think people are still misframing and misunderestimating this huge shift.
And I think it's because it is potentially an uncomfortable conversation for people because they've heard it a little bit. There's the tendency, like, we don't actually want to hear about this anymore, discuss it anymore. Let's, we've done that. Let's move on to something else, isn't it? But because I do a lot of work around difficult conversations, regardless of whether it's around gender. And people really, particularly, the British, we're not at the best at having those, what people consider to be conflict or challenging conversations, but it's how we approach it, isn't it? And I think you've been very clever. I remember in the book saying you kind of got people's attention in business by pointing out that the talent, so-called, I remember with the statistics, something like certainly well over 50 was female. Buying power for a number of different areas like IT, buying cars for the home, the buying power was female as well. And that's the kind of approach that's got people's attention, isn't it? Because it's focused on the bottom line and the ongoing success. And
which is why in the end, what's fascinating to me is these are not difficult conversations at all. This is not these. This is what I find really interesting is there are all these assumptions for both men and women that are slightly different. And the assumption from women is, oh, this is difficult and they're against us and they don't buy it. Well, that's not my experience of leadership teams at all. They might not be aligned. They might not have all this data. They might not know quite how significant an uptick this could be for their business. But these are not, in my experience, at all hard. They're actually very liberating conversations. I think a lot of these guys are thrilled to have a substantive fact-based debate about how to balance large corporations with all the complexities that they have within them without being accused of bias or willing misogyny of some sort or another.
Yes, indeed. And I love the phrase that you use about being gender bilingual. So both male and female need to understand the way that we communicate, and it is different, doesn't it? We have different nuances in the way that we communicate and our perspective. So it's same. And I know you lived in France for
a long time.
A long time. So when you learn to speak another language, you have to understand things get lost in translation. So you have to put a little bit more effort in, don't you, when you are learning that language and learning a culture. And I think it's, do you think that helped influence you when you were working out how to, or was it maybe just an instinctive thing?
No, I mean, I'm a globalist from way back, right? I did my MBA at INSEAD, which is a business school that prides itself on the multiplicity of the nationalities that go there. And you learn very, very early on that this kind of cross-cultural view I remember in business school, they put us in these groups where everybody had a different nationality, and they used to program them for maximum sort of comprehension. It was a very early lesson in, getting a team to deliver required lots and lots of cooperative listening skills and openness to understanding somebody with incredibly different perspectives, values, ways, systems of thinking.
Yes.
So a deep, deep understanding for cultural differences. And I think that's carries over very easily. Gender to me is kind of cultural.
Just part, very nice.
And I think if you want to sell to women, you want to recruit women, you want to build balanced teams, you want to sell to men, it helps to understand and research some of the enormous, wonderful research we now have on what these differences actually are. And I think there's been a half century where we weren't really allowed to talk about gender differences because they were seen to be too stereotypical. But yeah, the fact that men and women shop differently, choose differently, prefer different words, use different channels, buy different products is fascinating. And I think it helps any business to become much more gender bilingual. It's just a huge business opportunity.
Indeed. And good collaboration communication opportunity, isn't it, to realize that we're all kind of aiming for the same kind of outcome. We're not the enemy. I know it's a really old book now, but as it Dale Carnegie said, go into every situation and anticipating that the person you're going to engage with is an ally, not an enemy. And I think that's really a really valuable piece of wisdom. I can remember seeing you doing an interview with a gentleman from the Daily Telegraph, a video interview, and it was quite interesting because it does freak people out. It's like, I think that conversation when women say to their partner, I need to talk to you, there's that immediate, isn't there, what am I going to hear? And I can remember that this gentleman at the beginning of the interview was looking as fairly relaxed, but there was a bit of tension in the shoulders. And as you got into the conversation, you could see he visibly relaxed, that this is a conversation that we can all have and find it stimulating, invigorating, and actually very valuable.
Well, and I wish more women would engage in those terms. I think this is too much of an identity politics fight. I think there are more and more men, particularly young men, who are very open to this. And I wish that it would become much more mainstream and mainstreamed in all management development, leadership development, that there be modules about building gender bilingual skills. That's one of our big reframes with all our clients, is to stop this. It's not a diversity thing. It's not about empowering women or blaming men. It's about building management skills in working across gender differences and knowing what they are and being familiar with them, and the fact that there are now 52 genders. It's complex territory for all of us to navigate, and it's fast changing. So yeah, let's keep up, let's learn, let's embrace the future.
Indeed. So embracing the future, what would you like to see come out of this paradigm shift that's happened as a result of the pandemic? I know we're still in it at the moment, but it has been a time of reset, as we said earlier, and it's encouraged people to think more about what's important in life. So what would you like to see emerge?
Well, I think I'm already seeing emerge an enormous amount of men involved in hands-on balancing between family obligations and work as everything's moved home. So I think that's a huge shift in gender balance issues at home, which are resurfacing, right? Because if you haven't solved that issue at home, it's going to impact your work. I'm very concerned about the number of women who are losing their jobs compared to men, as they have to take on primary caretaking duties. So this whole issue, I've been spending a lot of time on gender balance at work. And what I found interesting is in this whole COVID crisis, the gender balance at home piece has raised its old head in a big way. And I think some couples are winning hugely by discovering and stretching into a new kind of balance. And others are not at all. And the statistics are showing that we still have a lot of work to do on the home front. So I think that'll be revisited. And I hope that companies will be, as they build back from this, keeping balance in mind on a couple of issues, gender, but also generations. I think there's a real risk. What we're seeing is kind of the extremes being left out, the old and the very young. And I think we're going to end up with an unfortunately homogenous middle, which could be quite dangerous for our collective futures.
Indeed, indeed, and lose such a wealth of perspective and experience as well, isn't it? Doing that. Okay, yeah. So may I ask you, Avivah, what are some of your values and practices that you hold yourself to show up in your role? Because it's a massive responsibility, isn't it? To not only be the CEO of a company, but to have your, the work that you're doing and the level of exposure that you have as well. What are your practices and values that keep you on track?
Well, to Dale Carnegie's point, always assuming the best of people before I get hit over the head, to not assuming that this is a divisive, conflictual issue, but on the contrary, thinking that this is fast-changing, complex, fascinating, and a millennial shift in human evolution, which is of potential benefit to every man, woman, and child on the planet if we get it right. So that is my value system, is this is a gift of love to all of mankind, all of humankind.
Wonderful.
And that I work very much in that place of loving what men and women bring to the table and trying to get the best out of everyone.
And I know you say in the book, I think that do you still take a month off every year where you can and just go home?
I did when I was still spread across continents with lockdown and things like
of course.
Family that's spread across 4 continents. So, but yes, I used to spend 6 weeks in a summer home where family could gather every summer for many, many a decade. And I'm shifting that as my children have now flown the nest, and we are recalibrating our national bases.
Okay.
And we're leaving the US, which was a summer base for us. So that is going away, and we will find a new place to gather.
Wonderful. Well, 4 continents, that's quite a juggling act, isn't it?
It's the downside, it sounds being when I was young and being global sounded really interesting, and I got to travel a lot around the world and discover lots and lots of different things. The downside is your children like it too, and then end up living very far away from you. So I have been punished by my own petard, as they might say.
Well, thank goodness for, as we particularly going into this shift, although it's a blessing and a curse that we have Zoom and FaceTime and all of those things. It's wonderful to be able to stay connected, isn't it? And sometimes it's just like I really like to just turn it off. But with family
and the upside is that they are both in 2 of the safest cities in the world on the coast. So who knew that this would pay off in that way? And I'm very grateful that they are.
Well, yes, that's a great silver lining, isn't it, in the situation? Yeah. So my final question today, and not that you're going anywhere in any hurry, but what's the legacy that you would like to leave, Avivah?
Ooh, the legacy that I would like to leave.
I mean, you've 7 books, you've done some great work, so you've left a stamp, but what else is there that you'd like to?
What else? What I'm moving into next is issues from gender balance to generational balance. So I'm very interested in what are we going to do with all these old people that we are increasingly becoming, like me, and shifting demographics of our societies, and how can we rebrand aging a little bit in the same way that we rebranded women into gender balance. We have to rebrand old people into a better generational balance, and I think over 60 crowds are underutilized, undersold,
Yeah, absolutely.
misrepresented. So that'll be my next project, and my current book, my next book that I'm working on now is called Late Work: From Recreation to Recreation. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Balance is the legacy, I hope.
Wonderful. Yeah, and that's such a great legacy to leave. We all need more balance, don't we? It's very easy, it gets our attention, and the next minute we get into automatic pilot and conditioning, and then we have to take the time, which is why part of the silver lining is this great reset that we've all had willingly or unwillingly, we've had to address, haven't we? So thank you so much for your time today. How can the viewers find you? So you're on LinkedIn, aren't you?
On LinkedIn, the company name and where you'll find most of my everything is 20-first.com.
Lovely.
Or my personal website is avivahwittenberg-cox.com, and emails and contact points, very easy to reach out. Please do.
Lovely.
Respond.
Wonderful. I will make sure that we put your details in the video as well for viewers. And once again, Avivah, thank you so much. It's been a really stimulating, interesting conversation. I really appreciate you giving us the time today.
My pleasure, Felicity. Really nice chatting with you. Good luck. Stay safe.
Thank you.